My parents told everyone I was the family disappointment, working as a janitor while my siblings became successful. When they faced losing their dream home, I appeared at their door as Victoria Sterling, a mysterious millionaire offering to help. They literally got on their knees thanking this generous stranger, never realizing they were begging their own daughter they had called worthless for years. But wait until you hear what happened when I dropped the act. Before we dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've experienced family betrayal, hit that like button. You're not alone. My name is Georgina Morrison, and I've been invisible in my own family for 30 years. While my brother Jake became a lawyer and my sister Emma opened her boutique, I cleaned office buildings at night and scrubbed floors during the day. 3 jobs, 7 days a week, just to survive. You see, in the Morrison family, success meant one thing: money and impressive job titles. Jake with his corner office was the golden child. Emma with her trendy store was the creative genius. Me, I was just the one who cleaned up other people's messes for minimum wage. Every family gathering followed the same script. Dad would introduce Jake as his lawyer son, Emma as his entrepreneur daughter, and me as, well, Georgina works in maintenance. The way he said maintenance like it was a disease always twisted my stomach into knots. But little did I know that a $5 lottery ticket was about to flip our entire family dynamic upside down. Growing up in the Morrison house meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. Jake was the star athlete who became the star student who became the star lawyer. Emma was the creative one who turned every hobby into a business venture. I was the practical one, which translated to the invisible one who handled the messy realities nobody else wanted to deal with. When Jake graduated high school, Dad threw him a country club party with 200 guests. When Emma graduated, they rented the fanciest restaurant in town. When I graduated with honors, they took me to Denny's and spent the meal discussing Jake's college prospects. I remember cutting my pancakes smaller and smaller, wondering what I'd done wrong. College was supposed to be my escape route. I'd earned a partial scholarship and was determined to prove myself. But every semester brought the same excuse when tuition was due. Jake needed law school money. Emma needed startup capital. I needed to learn independence and the value of hard work. So I worked myself to exhaustion. Cleaned dormitories at 5 in the morning before classes. Waited tables until midnight. Sold my textbooks immediately after finals to afford groceries. While my siblings focused on their studies, I was fighting just to stay enrolled. But I persevered because I believed education would finally earn me respect in this family. But little did I know that my efforts would never be enough. It was March 15th, a Tuesday night. I was finishing my shift at the downtown office complex, hands raw from scrubbing, back aching from endless mopping. The building had been particularly brutal that night. Someone had spilled coffee across the executive floor, and I'd spent 2 hours on my knees scrubbing stains while security guards made jokes about my appearance. I stopped at Murphy's gas station like I did every week to buy my lottery ticket. Same numbers every time: 10, 15, 23, 31, 42, and Powerball 7. These weren't random numbers. They were dates. 10 was my birthday that Dad forgot 3 years running. 15 was Emma's graduation party where I wasn't invited because she said it was only for people who truly supported her dreams. 23 was Jake's wedding where I couldn't bring a guest because I was single and would ruin the head table symmetry. 31 was Dad's 60th birthday where he thanked Jake and Emma for carrying on the family legacy without mentioning me once. 42 was my college graduation that none of them attended because Jake had a tennis tournament. And 7 was the number of years I'd been playing these same numbers, hoping someday my luck would change. That night I fell asleep on my lumpy mattress dreaming about having enough money to never worry about rent again. Not mansions or luxury cars. Just peace of mind. A quiet place where I could drink coffee in the morning without hearing neighbors argue through thin walls. Friday morning changed everything. I was rushing to work when I remembered my unchecked ticket. Almost threw it away, but something made me scan it with my phone. The screen flashed red. Numbers appeared one by one. My heart stopped beating for what felt like an entire minute. Every single number matched. All 6 numbers plus the Powerball. $57 million. I sat on the gas station curb staring at my phone until my eyes watered. Cars drove past. People walked by heading to work. Life continued normally around me while my entire world had shifted on its axis. I checked those numbers 10 more times, called the lottery hotline twice, even asked Frank the cashier to verify what he was seeing. It was real. But wait, it gets worse. My first thought wasn't about what I'd buy or where I'd travel. My first thought was about revenge. About 30 years of being treated like I didn't matter by the people who should have loved me most. And suddenly, a plan started forming in my mind. I didn't tell anyone about winning. Not my coworkers who complained about money problems daily. Not my neighbors who occasionally chatted in the hallway. Definitely not my family, who'd spent decades convincing me I'd never amount to anything. Instead, I claimed the prize quietly, hired a financial advisor, and set up a trust under a fake name. I had $57 million, but I was going to keep living like I had nothing. The next few weeks were surreal. I'd go to work cleaning toilets and emptying trash, knowing I had more money than all my coworkers would make in their lifetimes combined. I'd sit at family dinners listening to Jake and Emma brag about their modest successes while secretly owning more wealth than they could imagine. For 3 months, I worked my 3 jobs. Lived in my studio apartment with the leaky faucet and broken air conditioning. Drove my beat-up Honda with the dented bumper and rattling exhaust. The only things that changed were my secret bank account and the elaborate plan forming in my mind. I started researching my family's financial situation. It wasn't difficult since they'd never hidden their lifestyle or spending habits from me. Jake posted expensive dinner photos on social media. Emma constantly discussed her store revenues and investment strategies. Dad had always been loose-lipped about business dealings, especially after drinks. What I discovered was fascinating. Despite all their success and superiority, the Morrison family was built on debt and appearances. Jake's law firm was struggling against larger practices. Emma's boutiques were trendy but not profitable. Dad's construction business had been losing money for years due to poor decisions and gambling problems. They were all leveraged to the hilt, living paycheck to paycheck despite their impressive facades. Then fate delivered the perfect opportunity. Jake called on a Thursday afternoon in June, panic clear in his voice. The confidence that usually dripped from every word was completely absent. "Georgina, we need to talk about Mom and Dad. Can you come over tonight? It's urgent." The desperation in his voice told me everything I needed to know. The house of cards was finally falling, and they needed someone to catch the pieces. For the first time in my life, I was going to be the one with power to help or walk away. I arrived at the family house to find everyone gathered in crisis mode. Dad was pacing like a caged animal, usually perfect hair disheveled. Mom was crying in her favorite chair, clutching tissues. Jake frantically typed on his laptop, jaw clenched with stress. Emma stared at her phone, probably calculating how this disaster would affect her carefully crafted image. "What's going on?" I asked, taking my usual seat on the old couch, far from the inner circle where important family members sat during crises. Dad stopped pacing and looked at me with desperation and embarrassment I'd never seen before. "We're going to lose the house, Georgina. Everything we've built is falling apart." The story tumbled out in pieces like a confession from caught criminals. Dad's construction business had been hemorrhaging money for years, but he'd hidden the problems from everyone, including Mom. He'd been juggling creditors, making minimum payments, using new loans to pay old debts. He'd taken multiple mortgages on the house, maxed credit cards, borrowed against life insurance, even taken advances on Jake's inheritance. The bank was foreclosing in 60 days unless they found $300,000. "But that's not all," Mom added through tears. "The IRS is auditing us for 5 years back. We owe taxes we can't pay. And your father's gambling again. Online poker, sports betting, casino trips he hid from me." The gambling wasn't surprising. I'd known about Dad's problems since I was a teenager, when I caught him sneaking out nights and lying about whereabouts. But the family had always pretended it didn't exist, dismissing my concerns as troublemaking when I tried bringing it up. Now it was destroying everything they'd built on their foundation of denial. Jake looked up from his laptop, face pale with stress. "I've run every scenario. Even selling everything, liquidating assets, cashing retirement accounts, we'd still be 100,000 short. We need a miracle." Emma nodded grimly, social media persona completely absent. I've talked to the bank about extending deadlines, but they won't budge. They say Dad's been stringing them along for months with broken promises. We have 8 weeks or lose everything. I sat there listening to their despair, watching the family that had always seemed perfect and successful fall apart. For 30 years, they'd made me feel small and worthless. Now they were facing humiliation and loss while I held the key to their salvation. The power was intoxicating. For the first time in my life, I was the one with their solution. But I wasn't going to make it easy. I can't help financially, I said quietly, meeting each pair of eyes. You know I'm just a janitor. I barely cover my own rent. I don't have that kind of money. Dad's response was instant and cruel. Of course. We should have known better than to expect anything from you. You've never contributed anything meaningful to this family. Jake shook his head in disgust. Here we are facing the loss of everything, and you can't even pretend to care enough to help brainstorm solutions. Emma looked up from her phone with tears. I guess we'll figure this out ourselves, like we always do. At least Jake and I have options, connections, resources to draw on. Little did they know those cruel comments were about to backfire spectacularly. That night I went home and started planning the most elaborate scheme of my life. I was going to become Victoria Sterling, mysterious millionaire philanthropist. And I was going to give them exactly what they thought they wanted while teaching them exactly what they deserved. The plan required careful preparation and attention to detail. I hired actors, rented expensive cars, leased a penthouse across town, and began crafting a fake identity that would fool even my own family. Victoria Sterling needed a complete backstory, believable history explaining her wealth and interest in helping struggling families. According to the identity I created, Victoria Sterling was a tech entrepreneur who'd started coding as a teenager and built her first successful app in college. She'd sold that company for $50 million by age 25, then invested in other startups. Her portfolio had grown exponentially, making her one of the youngest female billionaires in the country. She was known for philanthropic work, particularly helping families facing financial hardship through no fault of their own. But Victoria Sterling was also extremely private and selective about who she chose to help. She'd heard about the Morrison family situation through mutual business connections and wanted to meet them personally before making decisions. This was going to be the performance of my lifetime. The transformation took 2 weeks of intensive preparation. I hired professional stylists, voice coaches, and acting instructors who specialized in executive presence. I bought wardrobes from expensive boutiques, spending more on single suits than I used to make in 3 months. I practiced Victoria's mannerisms for hours every day. She spoke slowly and deliberately, never rushing words or showing uncertainty. She wore expensive suits that fit like custom pieces because they were. She carried herself with confidence that comes from never worrying about money. Perfect posture, no fidgeting like nervous Georgina, direct eye contact commanding respect. Victoria Sterling was everything Georgina Morrison wasn't, and creating her was both empowering and heartbreaking. I rented a penthouse in the city's most exclusive building. The lease cost more per month than I'd made in an entire year as a janitor, but money was no longer an obstacle. The apartment came furnished with museum-quality art, Italian marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. It was the kind of place Jake and Emma had always dreamed of, but could never afford. I leased a black Mercedes and hired Marcus, a professional driver who thought he was working for a real tech billionaire. Marcus was discreet, professional, with excellent references from other wealthy clients. He never asked questions about Victoria's background or schedule, making him perfect for my purposes. The hardest part was learning to spend money like it didn't matter. For 30 years I'd counted every dollar, compared prices, sacrificed necessities for basic survival. Now I had to order expensive wine without checking prices, tip generously without calculating percentages, make purchasing decisions based on quality rather than cost. But little did I know the real challenge would be keeping emotions in check when I finally faced my family as Victoria Sterling. My newly hired assistant Sarah, a professional actress specializing in corporate roles, called my parents. Sarah had perfected high-level executive assistant tone, confident but respectful, efficient but not rushed. "Good afternoon," she said when Dad answered. This is Sarah Chun, executive assistant to Ms. Victoria Sterling. Ms. Sterling is a philanthropist and entrepreneur who's heard about your family's current situation through mutual business connections. She'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss possible assistance. Dad's voice changed completely when he realized he was talking to someone for money. Of course, he stammered. We'd be honored to meet with Ms. Sterling. When would be convenient? Ms. Sterling is available Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock at her residence. She prefers conducting initial meetings in comfortable, private settings. Would that work? Absolutely, Dad replied eagerly. Should we bring financial documents or references? That won't be necessary for the initial meeting. Ms. Sterling likes getting to know families she's considering helping on a personal level first. She's very selective about philanthropic partnerships. After Sarah hung up, I could hear excitement in Dad's voice as he called the family to share news. A real millionaire philanthropist wanted to meet them. Someone with resources to solve all their problems was taking interest. They had no idea they were walking into my carefully orchestrated test. That's when everything changed. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon. I spent the morning preparing, getting hair and makeup done by professionals who thought they were working for Victoria Sterling's important business meeting. I put on a navy designer suit costing more than my car was worth, accessorized with jewelry from stores where Emma window shopped, but could never afford to buy. I watched security cameras as my family arrived at the building, dressed in their best but looking nervous and out of place in the marble lobby. They were clearly intimidated by the wealth on display, and I felt satisfaction knowing they were about to experience the powerlessness that had defined my entire relationship with them. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. I was waiting as Victoria Sterling, complete with perfect posture and professional smile. My own parents looked right at me and saw a complete stranger. It was thrilling and heartbreaking simultaneously. Please come in, I said in Victoria's measured tone. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know this must be a difficult time for your family. As they settled into expensive Italian leather furniture I'd rented specifically for this occasion, I poured wine from bottles costing more than I used to make in a week. I watched them try impressing this wealthy stranger with fake smiles and overly polite conversation. The same act they put on for anyone they perceived as important. But wait, it gets worse. Within minutes of sitting down, they started talking about me without any prompting. Miss Sterling, Dad began apologetically, we want you to know we're a hard-working, responsible family. We've always taught our children the value of success and ambition. Mom nodded eagerly. Our son Jake is a partner at one of the city's top law firms. Our daughter Emma owns 3 successful boutiques. They've always been such achievers, always made us proud. I see, I replied, maintaining Victoria's neutral expression while my heart raced. Do you have other children? The pause that followed spoke volumes. Dad and Mom exchanged a glance I recognized from 30 years of family gatherings. The look that said we have to mention Georgina, but we'd rather not. We have another daughter, Emma said reluctantly, but she's not really part of our business discussions. She works in maintenance and cleaning services. Very different path from Jake and me. Jake jumped in, wanting to minimize my existence quickly. Georgina's always been more of a free spirit. Never really applied herself in school or career development like Emma and I did. Some people just aren't cut out for success. My hands shook slightly holding the wine glass, but I kept Victoria's expression composed. How interesting. How does Georgina feel about your current financial situation? She doesn't really understand business or money matters, Mom dismissed with a wave. We didn't want to burden her with these complex issues. She has her own simple life to worry about. Dad leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, Miss Sterling, Georgina's always been the family disappointment. We've tried helping her over the years, but she just doesn't have the drive or intelligence Jake and Emma have. Some children turn out winners, some turn out losers. The cruelty hit like a physical blow. I was literally the only person in the room with resources to save them, and they were calling me a loser to a complete stranger. The irony was staggering, but the pain was very real. That must be difficult for her, I said carefully, testing whether they had any capacity for empathy toward their own daughter. Emma shrugged. Georgina's never seemed bothered by her situation. She's always been content with mediocrity. Some people just have lower expectations. Jake nodded. We've learned not to expect much from her. It's easier that way. We focus energy on family members who can actually contribute something meaningful. Little did they know their words were about to come back and haunt them in ways they never imagined. I spent the next hour listening to them pitch their worthiness for Victoria Sterling's help. They painted themselves as victims of unfortunate circumstances, hard-working people who deserved rescue from temporary setbacks. They name-dropped business connections, exaggerated successes, and presented a family history bearing little resemblance to reality. Not once did they mention Dad's gambling addiction or years of financial mismanagement leading to this crisis. Not once did they acknowledge their lifestyle had been built on debt and appearances rather than genuine success. And not once did they show concern for how their financial collapse might affect me. Their daughter they assumed had nothing and could contribute nothing. Tell me about your family values, I said, genuinely curious how they describe themselves. What principles have guided your decisions over the years? Dad straightened, sensing opportunity to impress. Family loyalty is everything to us, Miss Sterling. We believe in supporting each other, working together, building something lasting for generations. Mom smiled warmly. We've always been there for each other through thick and thin. That's what families do. Emma added, we may not be perfect, but we're committed to each other's success. We celebrate achievements and help through difficult times. Jake concluded, the Morrison name means something in this community. We have a reputation for integrity and excellence we're proud to uphold. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at the absurdity. These were the same people who'd excluded me from celebrations, forgotten my birthday multiple times, refused to help with education, and just spent an hour describing me as a disappointment to a stranger who might give them money. But I maintained Victoria's professional demeanor and asked the question that would determine how far I'd take this charade. If I were to consider helping your family, what would you need specifically? They gave me exactly $300,000. The amount needed to satisfy the bank and prevent foreclosure. They'd clearly rehearsed this presentation, breaking down debt into categories and explaining how money would be used to stabilize their situation. And what would you offer in return? I asked. I don't typically make charitable donations without some form of accountability or partnership. This was where it got interesting. They offered to name a scholarship after Victoria Sterling at the local university. They promised to mention her in social media posts and business marketing materials. They suggested she could use their family as a success story in her philanthropic portfolio. But not once did they suggest I, Georgina, might have any role in this arrangement. Not once did they propose their daughter, who worked 3 jobs, might be included in their gratitude or future plans. I was completely invisible to them, even in the context of their own rescue. That's when I decided to take this performance to its ultimate conclusion. I told them I was impressed by their presentation and family values. I explained that Victoria Sterling typically conducted extensive background research before making financial commitments, but their case seemed particularly compelling. I'd have my team conduct due diligence over the next 2 weeks, and if everything checked out, I'd be prepared to provide the full amount they needed. The relief and gratitude on their faces was overwhelming. Dad actually started crying, thanking me repeatedly for considering their situation. Mom hugged me, sobbing about how Victoria Sterling was an angel sent to save their family. Jake and Emma both shook my hand formally, promising they'd never forget this kindness. As they prepared to leave, I handed each of them elegant business cards with Victoria Sterling's contact information. I want you to feel free to reach out if you have questions during the review process, I said. And please, feel comfortable sharing the good news with your extended family. I believe in the power of hope during difficult times. What I didn't tell them was that sharing the news was exactly what I wanted. I wanted everyone in their social circle to know Victoria Sterling was considering helping them. I wanted them to feel anticipation and excitement of impending rescue. I wanted them to start planning their future based on money they thought was coming. Because the higher I let them climb, the further they'd have to fall when I revealed the truth. Over the next 2 weeks, I monitored their behavior carefully. Sarah called them periodically with updates on Victoria Sterling's decision-making process, always keeping them hopeful but never guaranteeing anything. I watched their social media posts, where they hinted at positive developments without giving details. I observed them at the coffee shop where Mom met friends, listening as she whispered about their potential benefactor. The transformation in their attitude was remarkable. Suddenly they were sleeping better, smiling more, making plans for the future. Dad started talking about expanding his business once debt was cleared. Mom began researching vacation destinations for a celebration trip. Jake and Emma started treating the crisis like it was already solved. But most importantly, they continued treating me exactly the same way they always had. I tested this by showing up unexpectedly at Emma's store during the waiting period. I was still Georgina the janitor, wearing usual worn clothes and driving my beat-up car. I told her I'd been worried about the family's situation and wondered if there was anything I could do to help. Emma barely looked up from her inventory. "It's all handled," she said dismissively. "We have some very important people looking into our situation now. People with real resources and connections, not like, well, you know." I asked if she wanted to talk about what was happening, if she needed emotional support during this stressful time. She sighed impatiently. "Georgina, you wouldn't understand the complexities of what we're dealing with. This is business-level stuff, way above your head. Just don't worry about it, okay?" The casual cruelty confirmed that nothing had changed in their fundamental attitude toward me. They were still the same selfish, condescending people they'd always been. The prospect of rescue hadn't made them more generous or grateful toward their own family member. It had just made them more confident in their superiority. That's when I knew exactly how this story was going to end. But wait, it gets worse. The final test came when Sarah called them with Victoria Sterling's decision. The call came exactly 2 weeks after our initial meeting. Sarah used her most professional tone to deliver the message I'd carefully scripted. "Good afternoon. This is Sarah Chen calling on behalf of Ms. Victoria Sterling. I have wonderful news to share with your family. Ms. Sterling has completed her review of your situation and has decided to move forward with providing the financial assistance you requested." I could hear Dad whooping with joy in the background as Mom took the call. The relief in her voice was palpable as she thanked Sarah repeatedly. "However," Sarah continued, "Ms. Sterling has one condition she'd like to discuss with your family before finalizing the arrangement. She'd like to meet with all of your children, including Georgina, before making the final transfer of funds." There was a long pause on Mom's end. "Oh well, I'm not sure that's necessary. Georgina isn't really involved in our financial matters." Ms. Sterling was quite specific about this point, Sarah insisted. She believes financial assistance should benefit entire families, and she wants to ensure all family members are included in the conversation about how these funds will be used. Mom's voice became strained. "Of course, if that's what Ms. Sterling prefers. We'll arrange for Georgina to attend the meeting." "Excellent," Sarah replied. "Ms. Sterling will see all of you this Saturday at 2 o'clock. She's looking forward to finalizing this arrangement and moving forward with helping your family." After Sarah hung up, I could hear the family discussion in the background. They were clearly irritated about having to include me in their moment of triumph, but they weren't about to jeopardize their rescue over something so minor. Saturday arrived and every detail had to be perfect. This wasn't just about revealing truth. This was about delivering justice in the most poetic way possible. The penthouse was prepared like a stage set. Contracts on expensive letterhead arranged on the glass table. A photographer discreetly positioned to document the family's reactions. I'd even hired a videographer, telling him this was a documentary about philanthropic work. The entire scene was designed to capture every moment of what was about to unfold. But little did I know my family would make this more satisfying than I'd planned. They arrived 15 minutes early, which told me how desperate they were to finalize this arrangement. I watched security monitors as they rode the elevator to the penthouse, all dressed in their finest clothes and wearing expressions of barely contained excitement. Dad had gotten a haircut for the occasion. Mom was wearing her most expensive dress, the one she usually reserved for country club events. Jake and Emma looked like they were attending a job interview that would change their lives. And then there was me, Georgina, wearing the same discount store outfit I'd worn to clean offices just days before. My hair was pulled back in the simple ponytail that I wore to work. My shoes were scuffed and practical. I looked exactly like what they believed I was. a disappointing daughter who'd been dragged to an important meeting against everyone's better judgment. The elevator opened, and Victoria Sterling was waiting to greet them with the same warm professionalism she'd shown at their first meeting. My family stepped into the penthouse, and I could see the awe in their eyes as they took in the luxury surrounding them. This was the life they'd always dreamed of, the world they felt they deserved to be part of. "Welcome back," I said in Victoria's polished voice. "Please, make yourselves comfortable while we finalize these arrangements." As they settled into the seating area, I noticed how they positioned themselves. Jake and Emma sat closest to where Victoria Sterling stood, clearly considering themselves the most important participants in this meeting. Mom and Dad took the chairs that put them at the center of attention, and Georgina, their disappointing daughter, was directed to a seat at the far edge of the group, as if her presence was a regrettable necessity rather than a welcome addition. "I want to thank you all for coming today," I began, holding the folder that contained their salvation. "Before we proceed with the financial arrangements, I'd like to take a moment to talk about family dynamics and how they relate to my philanthropic philosophy." Dad leaned forward eagerly. "Of course, Miss Sterling. We're very interested in understanding your approach to helping families like ours." "I've been thinking a great deal about our previous conversation," I continued, "and I'm particularly interested in learning more about Georgina's role in your family." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jake and Emma exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mom's smile became forced and tight. Dad's confident posture shifted to something more defensive. "As I mentioned before," Emma said carefully, "Georgina has always been on a different path from the rest of us. She's never really been involved in family business decisions or planning. But surely she's part of your support system during difficult times," I pressed. "Families often discover hidden strengths during crises." Jake shook his head dismissively. "Georgina doesn't really have the skills or resources to contribute to solving our current situation. We've learned to handle important matters without depending on her input." "That must be difficult for Georgina," I said, turning my attention to myself sitting quietly in the corner. "How do you feel about your family's perspective on your abilities?" I looked up, meeting Victoria Sterling's eyes with the expression of resigned acceptance that my family expected to see. "I'm used to it," I said quietly. "I know I'm not as successful as Jake and Emma. I understand why they don't include me in important decisions." Dad nodded approvingly, as if I'd just confirmed something he'd been explaining to Victoria Sterling. "You see what we mean, Miss Sterling? Georgina has accepted her limitations. She doesn't have unrealistic expectations about her role in the family." But wait, it gets worse. What they said next pushed me past the point of any possible forgiveness. Mom leaned forward with the kind of condescending warmth she used when explaining unpleasant realities to children. "We've always tried to protect Georgina from situations that might be too complex or stressful for her to handle. Some people just aren't built for high-pressure decision-making." Emma added, "It's actually kinder this way. Can you imagine how overwhelmed Georgina would feel if we expected her to understand business negotiations or financial planning? We're doing her a favor by keeping her out of these discussions." Jake concluded with the cruelest blow of all. "Honestly, Miss Sterling, including Georgina in this meeting was probably unnecessary. She's going to benefit from your generosity through family stability, but she's not really equipped to participate in the adult conversations about how these funds should be managed." Little did they know that their adult conversation was about to take a turn they never saw coming. I stood up slowly, setting down the folder that contained their contracts. The room fell silent as Victoria Sterling walked to the center of the seating area, commanding attention with her presence. "I want to tell you a story," I began, my voice taking on a different quality that made everyone lean forward. "It's about a young woman who worked 3 jobs to put herself through college while her siblings received full family support for their education. A woman who graduated with honors, but was never congratulated because her achievements were considered less impressive than her brother's law degree or her sister's business ventures." Mom's face started to pale as she began to recognize elements of this story. Dad's confident expression wavered. Jake and Emma looked confused, not yet understanding where this was heading. This young woman spent 30 years trying to prove her worth to a family that had decided she was worthless. She cleaned their businesses for free, researched their legal cases without credit, and provided emotional support during their crises while receiving nothing in return. She watched them celebrate each other's successes while treating her accomplishments as insignificant. Dad started to interrupt, but I held up my hand in a gesture that commanded silence. When this family faced financial ruin, they gathered together to discuss solutions. But they didn't invite the young woman to participate because they assumed she had nothing to contribute. They looked right through her, dismissed her potential, and described her as a disappointment to anyone who would listen. The realization was starting to dawn on their faces. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Emma's eyes widened with growing horror. Jake's legal mind was putting the pieces together faster than the others. But here's what this family didn't know, I continued, reaching into my purse to pull out a familiar piece of paper. This worthless, disappointing, unsuccessful daughter had recently experienced a stroke of incredible luck. I held up the lottery ticket, the one with the numbers that represented every painful family memory, the one that had changed everything. $57 million, I announced, watching their faces transform from confusion to shock to absolute devastation. Your family disappointment won $57 million and didn't tell any of you about it. That's when everything changed. The silence in the room was deafening. Dad's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. Mom started hyperventilating, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she struggled to process what she was hearing. Emma's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Jake's face went through a series of expressions, from disbelief to understanding to something that looked like physical pain. But I wasn't finished yet. I reached up and began removing the pins from Victoria Sterling's carefully styled hair, letting it fall into the simple ponytail that Georgina always wore. I kicked off the expensive heels and stood barefoot on the marble floor. I began unbuttoning the designer suit jacket, revealing the discount store blouse underneath. "Meet Victoria Sterling," I said, my voice shifting from the polished philanthropist's accent to my own natural tone. "Also known as your daughter Georgina, the family disappointment who just spent 2 weeks listening to you describe her as worthless while begging her for money." Mom was the first to find her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Georgina, what have you done? What have I done?" I repeated, my composure finally beginning to crack. "What have I done? I've given you exactly what you deserve. I've shown you what it feels like to be desperate and powerless. I've let you experience the humiliation of begging someone who thinks you're worthless." Dad stood up abruptly, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "This is insane. You've been lying to us, manipulating us, making fools of us." "Making fools of you?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You made fools of yourselves. I didn't force you to describe your own daughter as a loser to a stranger. I didn't make you dismiss my intelligence and exclude me from family decisions. I just gave you an audience for the cruelty you've been showing me for 30 years. Jake was shaking his head in disbelief. "So there never was a Victoria Sterling. There never was going to be any help. You've been playing some sick game while we've been facing bankruptcy." "Oh, but there is going to be help," I said, picking up the folder from the coffee table. "Just not the kind you were expecting." I opened the folder and pulled out a different set of documents than the ones they thought they were going to sign. These weren't loan agreements or charitable donations. These were legal contracts I'd prepared with the help of my own attorney, documents that would reshape our family dynamic permanently. "I'm prepared to save your house and pay off your debts," I announced, watching hope flicker back into their eyes. "But it's going to cost you more than money. It's going to cost you your pride." The first contract was for Dad. In exchange for clearing his gambling debts and saving his business, he would have to attend weekly therapy sessions for his addiction, give up all control over family finances, and publicly acknowledge at his next business networking event that his daughter Georgina had saved his company from bankruptcy. The second contract was for Mom. She would receive enough money to maintain her lifestyle and social standing, but she would have to write personal apology letters to every family member and friend who had heard her describe me as a disappointment, explaining that she had been wrong about my capabilities and character. The third contract was for Jake. His law firm's debts would be cleared and he would receive additional capital to compete with larger practices, but he would have to step down from any position of authority in family decisions and publicly credit me as a silent partner in his business success. The fourth contract was for Emma. Her boutiques would be fully funded and expanded to 5 locations, but she would have to hire me as a business consultant at a salary that reflected my actual value, not the minimum wage jobs I had been forced to accept. But wait, it gets worse. The final condition applied to all of them. Every month for the next 10 years, on the 15th day, which was the date of Emma's graduation party that I wasn't invited to, the entire family would gather for dinner at a restaurant of my choosing. During these dinners, each of them would have to stand up and publicly thank Georgina Morrison for her generosity, her intelligence, and her importance to the family's success. The contracts sat on the coffee table like a gauntlet thrown down. They could have their financial salvation, but they would have to swallow their pride and acknowledge the daughter they had spent 30 years treating like she was worthless. Dad was the first to explode. This is blackmail. You can't force us to humiliate ourselves just because you got lucky with some lottery numbers. Lucky. I repeated, my voice rising for the first time. Lucky. Do you know what numbers I played, Dad? Do you know why I chose them? I picked up a pen and started writing on the whiteboard that hung on the penthouse wall. 10. My birthday that you forgot 3 consecutive years. 15. Emma's graduation party that I wasn't invited to because she said it was only for people who supported her dreams. 23. Jake's wedding where I wasn't allowed to bring a guest because I was single and would ruin the symmetry of their head table. With each number I wrote, their faces grew more ashamed. These weren't random lottery selections. These were a catalog of 30 years of family cruelty, turned into the combination that would make me richer than all of them combined. 31. I continued, Dad's 60th birthday party where you spent your entire speech thanking Jake and Emma for carrying on the family legacy without mentioning me once. 42. My college graduation that none of you attended because Jake had a tennis tournament. And 7. The number of years I've been playing these same numbers, hoping that someday my luck would change. The room fell silent again as the full scope of their cruelty was laid bare. These weren't just random hurts or thoughtless moments. This was a pattern of systematic exclusion and devaluation that had shaped my entire adult life. Mom started crying, but this time her tears looked different. These weren't the desperate tears of someone facing financial ruin. These were the tears of someone confronting the reality of their own behavior. Georgina, I had no idea, she whispered. I never realized how much we were hurting you. You never realized because you never bothered to look, I replied. You were so convinced that success was measured by job titles and bank accounts that you never noticed that your daughter was working 3 jobs to survive while you spent thousands on family vacations that I wasn't invited to join. Emma finally found her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. So what happens now? Do we sign these contracts or do we lose everything? That's up to you, I said, returning to the calm, measured tone that had served Victoria Sterling so well. You can choose to swallow your pride and accept help from the daughter you've always underestimated. Or you can maintain your superiority complex and face bankruptcy with your dignity intact. Jake picked up one of the contracts and started reading through the legal language. His face went through a series of expressions as he processed the terms. These conditions, he said slowly, they're not just about money. You want us to completely change how we treat you. I want you to treat me the way you would treat any family member who had just saved you from financial ruin, I corrected. I want you to show me the respect and gratitude that you would show to anyone else who had offered you this level of assistance. The only difference is that I'm your sister and daughter, which should make the gratitude easier, not harder. Dad sat down heavily in his chair, his anger replaced by something that looked like defeat. And if we don't sign? If we refuse your conditions? Then you face bankruptcy on your own, just like I faced 30 years of family gatherings on my own. Just like I faced college tuition on my own. Just like I've faced every challenge in my life on my own, because you taught me that I couldn't count on family support. But here's the difference between us, I continued. I'm offering you a choice. You taught me that family members don't get choices. You decided I was worthless and treated me accordingly without ever asking if I wanted to prove myself. I'm giving you the opportunity to earn my help. Little did I know that their decision would reveal something about my family that I had never fully understood before. Mom was the first to reach for a pen. Her hand was shaking as she signed her name to the contract, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Georgina. I've been a terrible mother, And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can do better. Emma signed next, tears streaming down her face. I've been jealous of you for years, she admitted. Jealous of your independence, your strength, your ability to survive without our approval. I was too proud to admit that I wished I had your courage. Jake's signature came third, after several minutes of internal struggle. I've spent my entire career representing clients in family disputes, he said quietly. I've seen what happens when families tear each other apart over money and pride. I don't want that to be our story. Dad was the last to sign, and his signature took the longest. When he finally put the pen down, he looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger or disappointment or condescension. It was something that looked almost like respect. I underestimated you, he said simply. I've been underestimating you your entire life. I don't know if I can undo 30 years of damage, but I want to try. And that's when something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling triumphant or satisfied, I felt exhausted. The anger that had sustained me through this elaborate revenge plot was starting to fade, replaced by something more complex and harder to define. The contracts were signed. The money would be transferred. Their debts would be cleared and their lives would be stabilized. But more importantly, our family dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the family disappointment, the one whose opinions and feelings didn't matter. But wait, it gets better. What happened next surprised even me. Over the following months, something remarkable began to take shape. The monthly family dinners that I had designed as a form of ongoing humiliation became something entirely different. They became opportunities for real conversation, genuine connection, and the slow reconstruction of relationships that had been damaged by decades of neglect. Dad not only attended therapy for his gambling addiction, but he also started seeing a counselor to address the deeper issues that had made him such a critical and dismissive father. He began to understand how his own upbringing had shaped his narrow definition of success and worth. The first time he stood up at our monthly dinner to thank me publicly, his voice broke halfway through the speech. I've spent 68 years believing that a man's worth was measured by his bank account and his business achievements, he said, tears in his eyes. But my daughter taught me that real success is about showing up for the people you love, even when they've failed to show up for you. Georgina, you saved more than our house. You saved our family. Mom's apology letters to friends and extended family members led to deeper conversations about family dynamics and parenting mistakes. Several of her friends admitted that they had always wondered why the Morrisons seemed to favor some children over others, and Mom began to see how obvious our dysfunction had been to outside observers. She called me one evening, 3 months after the contracts were signed. Georgina, she said, her voice thick with emotion, I've been talking to my therapist about the way I raised you, and she asked me something that I can't stop thinking about. She asked me what I was so afraid of that I had to keep one of my children small, to make the others feel big. The question hit me like a punch to the gut, not because it was cruel, but because it was so insightful. What were you afraid of, Mom? I asked gently. That there wouldn't be enough love to go around, she whispered. That if I celebrated you the way you deserved, somehow Jake and Emma would get less. It's the stupidest thing I've ever admitted out loud, but I think I believed that success was a finite resource, and if one of my children got too much, the others would suffer. Love isn't pie, Mom, I said, surprised by my own wisdom. There's not less love because you give more to someone who needs it. Love multiplies when you share it. Jake's law firm flourished with the additional capital, but more importantly, he began to approach family decisions with the collaborative spirit that he brought to his professional mediation work. He started asking for my input on business decisions and actually listening to my suggestions. The first case where he officially credited me as a consultant involved a family business dispute that was remarkably similar to our own situation. A successful family had been torn apart by favoritism and financial mismanagement, and the siblings were suing each other over inheritance rights. I worked with Jake to develop a mediation strategy that focused on healing relationships rather than just dividing assets. We spent weeks researching family therapy techniques and collaborative problem-solving methods. When the case was resolved with all siblings reconciled and the business saved, Jake made sure that every legal document and media interview mentioned my contributions as family dynamic specialist. The recognition felt good, But what felt better was working alongside my brother as an equal partner for the first time in our lives. Emma hired me as a consultant for her boutiques, and we discovered that we worked well together when she wasn't trying to prove her superiority over me. My business degree and analytical skills complemented her creative vision and marketing instincts perfectly. Within 6 months, we had expanded to 7 locations and were turning higher profits than she had ever achieved on her own. More importantly, we had developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than sibling rivalry. Emma surprised me one day by suggesting that we rebrand the business as Morrison Sisters Boutiques. "I want people to know that this success belongs to both of us," she said. "I spent so many years trying to prove that I was better than you, when what I should have been doing was figuring out how we could be better together." But the most significant change was in how we talked to each other during our monthly dinners. What had started as forced expressions of gratitude evolved into genuine family meetings, where everyone's voice carried equal weight. We started planning holidays together, making collective decisions about family investments, and actually enjoying each other's company. The conversations weren't always easy. There were moments when old patterns would resurface, when someone would slip back into condescending language or dismissive attitudes. But now we had a framework for addressing these issues directly instead of letting them fester in silence. During one particularly difficult dinner, Jake made a comment about my cleaning background that carried the same dismissive tone he'd used for years. Before anyone else could respond, Dad immediately called him out on it. "Jake, that's exactly the kind of thinking that nearly destroyed this family," Dad said firmly. "Your sister's work experience gave her insights into business operations that your law degree never could have provided. We need to start seeing different experiences as strengths, not weaknesses." The fact that Dad was defending me instead of dismissing me felt like a miracle. The fact that he was doing it in front of the entire family felt like vindication. 6 months after the contracts were signed, something happened that I never could have predicted. We were having dinner at one of our monthly gatherings when Dad raised his glass for an unexpected toast. "To Georgina," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that I had never heard directed toward me before. "For teaching us that family isn't about who succeeds the most or earns the most money. It's about who shows up for each other when it matters. You showed up for us when we needed you most, even after we had failed to show up for you for 30 years. That makes you the most successful person at this table, and it always has." Mom, Jake, and Emma raised their glasses in agreement, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen by the people who were supposed to love me most. But the real test of our family's transformation came 8 months later, when I faced a crisis of my own. I had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that required intensive treatment and would keep me out of work for several months. The old Georgina would have handled this alone, never asking for help, never expecting support. But this new version of our family dynamic meant something different. When I called to tell them about my diagnosis, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Jake took a leave of absence from his law firm to drive me to medical appointments. Emma closed her stores for a week to research treatment options and alternative therapies. Mom moved into my guest room to provide daily care and companionship. Dad used his construction contacts to modify my house for accessibility during recovery. None of this was required by our contracts. None of it was part of the monthly dinner obligations or the public gratitude requirements. They were simply showing up for me because that's what families do, and for the first time in my life, I was experiencing what it felt like to be truly supported by the people who shared my DNA. During one of my worst days, when the treatment had left me weak and nauseated, Emma sat beside my bed reading business magazines out loud just to keep me company. At one point, she stopped mid-article and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I keep thinking about all the times you were probably sick or struggling, and we never even noticed," she said. "How did you survive 30 years of feeling so alone?" "I survived because I had to," I replied. "But I'm not alone anymore, and that makes all the difference." As I recovered from my treatment, and our family continued to grow stronger, I began to understand something profound about forgiveness and redemption. The revenge I had planned was supposed to be about making my family pay for 30 years of neglect and dismissal. Instead, it had become about giving all of us the chance to build something better. The girl who used to clean office buildings and count every dollar was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, who had the resources to help others, and who had learned that the best revenge isn't about making people suffer for their mistakes. It's about giving them the opportunity to become better versions of themselves, and then holding space for their growth when they choose to take that opportunity. 1 year after the great reveal, we were planning our annual family vacation, something that had never included me before. As we sat around my kitchen table debating destinations and making lists, I realized that this was what I had been searching for my entire life. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just belonging. Jake looked up from his laptop where he was researching flight prices. "You know what's funny?" he said. "A year ago, we thought we were losing everything. Our house, our businesses, our reputation. We thought our lives were over. And now?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "Now we have more than we ever had before," Dad replied. "Not just financially, but in every way that actually matters." Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "We have our daughter back," she said simply. "We have our sister back. We have each other back." That evening, as I sat in my beautiful house that lottery winnings had purchased, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The numbers that had once represented my deepest hurts had become the keys to my family's salvation and my own healing. 10. The birthday they forgot had become the date we now celebrated with elaborate parties planned months in advance. 15. The graduation party I wasn't invited to had become Emma's new favorite number because it represented the day each month when our family came together. 23. The wedding where I couldn't bring a guest had become the date Jake and I set aside each month for brother-sister lunch meetings to discuss business and life. 31. The birthday speech that excluded me had become Dad's reminder to acknowledge everyone's contributions in every family gathering. 42. The graduation they missed had become the number of businesses Mom now helps me research for potential investment. And 7. The years I'd played those numbers hoping for change had become the number of family traditions we'd created since our reunion. The pain behind those numbers hadn't disappeared entirely. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, but they had been transformed from symbols of rejection into foundations for connection. I still play the lottery sometimes, but now I choose different numbers. Numbers that represent hope instead of hurt. Numbers that look forward instead of backward. Because I've learned that while you can't change the past, you can absolutely transform how it shapes your future. My name is Georgina Morrison, and this is the story of how I won the lottery twice. Once with numbers on a ticket that represented every time my family had failed me, and once with the people who learned to love me the way I had always deserved to be loved, even though it took them 30 years and $57 million to figure it out. The best part is, I didn't have to spend a single dollar of that lottery money to get what I really wanted. I just had to be brave enough to show my family who they could become if they chose love over pride, growth over stubbornness, and connection over the shallow markers of success that had defined us for so long. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to accept less than your worth. And sometimes, the people who hurt you the most are capable of becoming the people who love you the best. You just have to be brave enough to give them the chance to prove it, and wise enough to recognize genuine change when it happens. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, and let me know in the comments what family challenges you've overcome, or what relationships you're working to heal. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places, and turning pain into power. Share this with someone who needs to remember that they deserve to be valued and celebrated by the people who matter most in their life. Remember, you're stronger than you know. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, and it's never too late for the people in your life to recognize what they've been missing. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to stop accepting crumbs when you deserve the whole feast. And who knows? Maybe your lottery ticket is still waiting to be scratched. Not the kind that makes you rich in money, but the kind that makes you rich in love, respect, and genuine family connection. Those are the only jackpots that really matter in the end.